So, Penelope, let's talk about you.
Okay.
I know you can't wait. Um, I thought that maybe a good place to start is with a question that might sound deceptively simple. But I really was curious about how did the intersection of consumerism, image production, and photo sharing websites, how did that became something that you were interested in within your craft?
Mm.
Like what was it? It's probably not
Yeah.
a single moment, but
It's not. It's like at least a 60-year evolution, I think. And when thinking about that question, um, I can't not think about this store that when I was, I guess, between the age of 8 and 12, I would go to every week to spend my allowance on. And it was called Kresge's, and I don't know what the equivalent would be in the United States. I don't think there was Kresge's in the States because
where was this?
this is in Toronto, Canada, where I grew up. And it just had everything. It had absolutely everything from, hardware to women's lingerie to pets like aquariums and cats and rabbits um
Sounds like a Target.
and direct, well, like Target, but it was super funky. Like everything was in bins laid out in very weirdly organized fashion. And when I think about it, I've thought about this store a lot um, over the past few years. I realize how influential it's been on all of my work, actually, because one of the things that I do is create these kinds of taxonomies of things that people make for us to consume. So it's not so much a taxonomy of things that I'm seeing, but more a taxonomy of things that as a collective culture we make for ourselves. And that is what that store was. It wasn't like a museum that had been already kind of, where art has been made and sanctioned by somebody who's educated. It it was a place where everybody went for everything they needed, which told me so much more about the world than any museum could. And I would just wander as though I was wandering through a museum in this place because, of course, I only had 10 cents or something. I forget how much so I had to be careful about how I spent my money. And I would just spend hours in this, wandering at like women's bras. Like there were these huge bras with these great big cups, and it was like, what is that for? Because nobody in my family had
It's a
but
hat.
anything like
It's
that.
for a rainy day.
The people with 2 heads? I don't know. Anyway, so I could sort of trace back everything to that experience maybe.
Wonderful.
Um, and then the serious work that I started to make, when I started thinking about consumerism was before Web 2.0 or whatever they call it, Web 2.0. Um, and it was really very much about how corporate um, and consumer industries target and market to consumers and thinking about desire and collective desire and why we desire certain things. And then when people could start posting and sharing, that just changed my life because that was right back to that kind of Kresge moment where it's like me wandering around this incredibly funky world,
Mm.
looking at what people want. And then, Craigslist and eBay has been so incredible because it's like what people want, but also then what they don't want but can't get rid of. Like they can't destroy it. So there's this element of where value is placed and then how people represent that. And then, you know, and then who wants that, like, and then in the photographs, most of the photographs that I'm using now, like as opposed to before Web 2.0, those photographs, bef- before people could share,
Mm.
they were all very considered photographs, right? Meant to sell. But it's just fascinating to me how people express the things that they don't want, but that have value to them, so they can't throw away
Yeah.
and expect that someone else might want them. So, there's something so much about humanity in that's sort of where I am right now, and it kind of right back to that store, right? Like, that's where I found a certain kind of humanity that I couldn't find in a museum.
It's interesting to me that also the first reference for that is websites like eBay and Craigslist, where also the filtering system was not as developed as like the hashtags world and what happens afterwards when we get in
Right.
social media. It was
And it
really
still isn't actually, which is
it's like
interesting.
a
Yeah,
social dump
yeah,
of random stuff and behaviors, right? With Craigslist, it's also
right.
behaviors.
Right, and actually what's really nice about it is it's completely like the visual elements and the formal elements of all of that isn't considered in the way that hashtagged photographs are, right?
Yeah.
Like, so Instagram is not that interesting to me. It's interesting to me from the point of social phenomenon and social media and what that is doing to our culture, but it's not that interesting to me from the point of view of photography because it's all people who are very self-aware of the photographs that they're making. And when someone photographs a TV in their living room to sell, they don't give a shit about anything else that's around it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Right.
you get some really interesting, unexpected
Yeah. Yeah.
emblems of life there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. So there's that element of the candid spontaneity of these images and the way that people talk about those elements of their life that kind of take you back to walking around with your 10 cents trying to find something and figure out what a bra does.
Mm.
Something I can also relate to. Um, so we're thinking about accumulations and we're thinking about what people leave behind on purpose or by mistake. And these vast accumulations, then you mentioned taxonomies already, so we can already know like those vast accumulations within your work. You find ways to articulate similar visual tropes, like selfies taken in front of sunsets. That would be one of them. That's very,
Yeah.
very well known within your work. So tell us something about the self presentation aspect, um, and also say something about the other end of that, because we're not just taking a selfie of ourselves in front of a sunset where no one can see our faces because the source of light is coming from behind, but also about appropriation and
Mm.
sharing, because your value online as a participant is also determined by your visual fluency and gestures that are then shared by millions and millions of people, and your ability to capture those moments and share them on your feeds. And I think your work
So many questions, Rotem.
wait, no, let me tie all of that in a bow. Because your work considers how photography participates in human behavior, and how social media interfaces with that. So maybe we can start with that. That I'm interested. In other words, I'm interested in how you're thinking about accumulation and how it relates to self-presentation,
Mhm,
um, and the other end of that, which is sharing online.
mhm.
See, I tied that in a bow.
Yeah,
So
that's good. Yes. Good questions.
thank you.
Um, I don't know, I think that, a lot of the work that I have made starts from somewhere else and then ends up in that kind of, in that discourse of, like, what all the questions that you just raised. That project with the sunset portraits, it was, it came from this sense that, wow, everybody is doing this one thing at this one moment, and with this one object that we have, which is the sun, and then sharing it in this, like this is probably the most long living ritual that humanity has, right? Is to watch the sun go down and have the faith that it's going to come back up again, right? And I think of it as sort of like people lighting a Shabbat candle on Friday night all at the same time, or everybody praying at mass on Sunday morning all at the same time. There's something about the collective ritual of doing these things that is so beautiful. And then photography enters that discussion, and it starts to become about authorship. And to me, that's really fascinating when something that is a collective ritual behavior gets gets re re what would the word be? Um kind of recombined in the mind to be something about an individually authored moment. There's something destroyed in that moment then, right? Like if you're claiming authorship to something that's so collectively ritual and beautiful, you're denying that kind of collectivity in that moment. But then, after that moment, putting it back out, like crossing that threshold of the screen into a kind of social media space, puts it back into the collective again. So there's this kind of weird cognitive dissonance in my mind about what that is actually. It's like it's moving from the collective to the individual, back to the collective again, without really knowing what's going on. Like whoever's taking those photographs is really experiencing this one individual moment of beauty. Um, because that individual moment of beauty is based on centuries and centuries of collective behavior, right? Anyway, I think what is also important to say about that work is that, um, well, it started from just the sun in those images, and then realized that there are all these photographs that people are taking where the technology of the camera is exposing for the sun, not the subject. And so that was the one and only project that I've ever done that has individuals in it, but the individuals are completely indistinguishable, as you said, because of that weird technological glitch that the camera is doing. And I can't actually make that project anymore because camera technology has changed. So a lot of my work is really so dependent on the technologies that I'm that people are photographing with or that I'm working with.
Mm.
Um, but what I was going to say, yeah, what I was going to say about that project is, I never ever of all of either the sun's images or the sunset portraits images, um, there's never an image that I have taken that does function as a kind of individually authored photograph. I'm really searching for those photographs that do kind of follow that script of that centuries old, like, there's the sun just above the horizon, um, about to disappear. Or in the portraits project,
Mhm.
they absolutely have disappeared. You cannot, you can project what you might think of these people on the photographs because there's slight elements of detail, but which I do actually, which is kind of a funny thing. Like I'll be working on it and I'll be like, "Oh, this guy's a jerk," or "This couple, they're so beautiful. Look at them, they're so cute." Like I have like these, but you would never be able to recognize anybody in any of the pictures.
Yeah.
So the idea of the author in all of my work is very much about a collective kind of script rather than in that work anyway, rather than an individual sense of authoring something. Maybe the opposite is true. Yes, absolutely. The opposite is true with the eBay and Craigslist stuff, where the photographs that those people are taking, they don't care about those photographs. They don't feel like they're authoring those photographs, but it's in those photographs that actually there is a kind of individualistic
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. And I want to go back to eBay a little bit later on because I want to talk also about your learning from eBay project, and I'm curious to hear what we can learn from eBay in that respect. But as you were talking about the sunsets, I couldn't help but also thinking about the role sunsets play, not just in the, as you say, the most ancient collective ritual of humanity, but also in the histories of the collective rituals of photography itself. Fact
Right. Well, I mean, the sun is like we wouldn't have photography without sunlight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that, the inventors of photography, people like Talbot, were talking about photography as a pencil of nature and the need of the sun to be captured in this way, and how photographs are just an instrument in the service of nature, which is of
Right.
course problematic at its core because it assumes that the humans that are operating the equipment do not have agency.
Right.
I'm
Right.
thinking about that those early beginnings in the 19th century in relation to those early beginnings of photography and social media, and the way that you capture them in your work as well. And I'm thinking about the commodification of this ancient ritual of observing the sunsets by capturing them, uploading them, turning them into something that generates value for the person
Right.
who posts them. I'm curious if you're thinking about those relationships as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the idea that the photograph itself has any kind of meaning, enough meaning to post, even though when posted, it's one of at least, well, at this point on Flickr anyway, I started the Sun project on Flickr because that was sort of what that was before Instagram.
Yeah.
But now it's sort of like a stock site. But really, it was the only place that everybody could share photographs. Everybody, like kids, parents, grandparents, stock photographers and amateurs and actual photographers, whatever. But now I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, the value of them. Yeah, the fact that right now there are more than 49 million sunset images on Flickr.
Oh, just
So
Flickr, not in
just on Flickr.
Instagram, I imagine it's like gazillion. Is there a number?
Yeah, probably.
Is there a type?
Um, yeah, so this idea that there is a kind of value in the moment for the individual, but once shared, that value becomes one of 49 million, which is, percentage, there's no value in that really.
Absolutely.
Unless we think about it as collective value, which is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, the taxonomy that you create really speaks to that deeply. So
Well, and also speaking of taxonomy, it's interesting how it works differently in each in however I happen to be thinking about it with whatever project.
yeah,
But with the Suns project, and also with other, other pretty much all of them actually. I would say I end up creating these taxonomies, but mainly because I feel like the overwhelming number of things that are the overwhelming number of photographs, the overwhelming number of people making the same kind of photograph is a huge part of it, right? So if I only showed like 3 suns, it wouldn't have the same, you know, sense of like 2,400 suns on a wall, like there's this idea of the kind of sublime, the digital sublime, pretty much in all of the work, I guess, where you do need a certain kind of, there's like a tipping point almost, right? You need a certain number of things to get that feeling when you're up against the work actually physically in the space. You really have that sense of, whoa, that's a lot. And I think that's really important to my work, I think, that you get the sense of the numbers in a physical way.
And I want to spend just one more minute thinking with you about this, because there is this really interesting meeting point in your work between the digital images that you appropriate, the way you're referring to it as like the digital sublime, but then the way that those become objects in the world through your installations and through your work.
Mm.
So I'm curious about the way that those two worlds meet within your practice. And within your work, you also think more broadly about the meeting points of digital and analog, films and cameras on our phones and photo labs and devices. Can you talk a little bit about how the digital and physical worlds intersect within your work?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question. I mean, and really important to me. I think that um, it's funny starting this conversation about that store. Maybe it kind of goes back to that store, right? The physicality of things can have an affective, um, e- um, e- an effective. The physicality of things can actually be effective, right? Like they can have an effect on your body.
Mm.
Um, and one of the things that's fascinating to me really about the Craigslist and eBay stuff, and that project started with televisions, big CRT televisions that people were trying to get rid of. Thinking about the physical thing, like a dinosaur in somebody's basement or garage that they just can't lift even, and then taking a photograph of it and uploading it to some platform like Craigslist. So it goes from this physical thing that has come from all over the world, like all the parts manifest in this object, to this ephemeral thing that lands on our screen, representing this physical thing again. So one of the things that I do with a lot of my work is try to manifest that physicality again, um, mainly because these things have to be navigated. We can't just ignore the fact that there are millions and millions of CRT televisions in landfills. They are things that, one of the projects that came out of that television work was actually finding LCD TVs
Mm.
and taking them apart and using the components in this kind of very precarious, stacked way, where you actually have to physically navigate the physicality of these things, which we normally don't really think of as being physical. Like I'm looking at a screen at you. I'm not actually looking at the screen. I'm looking at you. The screen kind of disappears. Um, so the physicality has been super important to me, um, to bring it back to that. And really, our entire experience of digital is a kind of not experiencing the physical, right? Especially now, like after COVID with Zoom, with you and I, like
I can now
we
talk
can't
like
touch it.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, we can, but we're not physically touching each other. We're not in the same room. We're not breathing the same air. So um, it's really important for me to bring it back to the physical. I mean, we still breathe and eat and shit and have sex and like we still have to sleep. There's still physicality in our lives. So, yeah.
Yeah, even though the biggest criticism that is voiced toward younger generations is that they no longer do those things because they're
Well,
on,
they have to.
but they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they still have to eat and they still breathe and
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
For now, at least.
Yeah, right.
As you were talking about that, I realized something that I haven't thought about earlier in the context of your work. Bear with me. You were talking about how you're interested in the physicality, about how you're interested in making sure that we realize, that we notice the physical objects that we deem transparent, right? When we're taking a photograph, we don't necessarily think about the camera itself or the conditions that have led to the production of a specific image. So you are interested in making those elements not as transparent, and that, of course, connects to how you're thinking about residue as well. And
Mm.
earlier, we were also talking about how the taxonomy of your work also brings to light the question of the author, the producer of the image. And I'm now realizing that within your work, there's this really deep interest in making the mechanisms of the production, whether those are the contextual production or the physical production of an image, visible, so that we can look both at the system and the people that produced that image. So I just realized that as you were talking about
Hmm.
your work, and I haven't thought about that earlier in relation to your practice.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think about it slightly differently, but that yeah, allowing for the structures that produce those those images to be visible
Mhm.
and revealed in the process or in the product. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, learning from eBay really is a kind of um, gesture towards materializing something that we don't really understand um, in its full materialization, right? Like there are, I made a list and I don't have it here, but I can, I made a list during that. So I had this exhibition in Finland, and Anna-Kaisa Rastenberger, who was the curator at the Museum of Photography, the Finnish Museum of Photography, where I had it, was so amazing, and she was so encouraging um, with this project. And a lot of what came out of that was through her encouragement, which was amazing. Um, and I love to work with curators that way. So, that's just a shout out to her. But one of the things, so I made this big list, an entire text piece of the number of objects of certain objects for sale on eBay at the time of the show, um, which is one way of physicalizing
Mhm.
the numbers. But I've been collecting images from eBay and Craigslist for 10 years. Now actually 15 years, or 13 years. But that was sort of a 10-year point, and because it was about 3 years ago. Um, I realized we just can't keep going on like this, right? Like all of this stuff, I made this huge installation just before that of landfills filled with TVs. Um, so there is the physicality of all of these objects that we have to deal with, and every single image. I think I counted that I collected 28,000 images in that 10 years of stuff for sale. So I have those 28,000 images on my computer, and um, and I'm working with them right now. But the idea that um, if all of those 28,000 images were physically printed in a space or in a book or in something, you would have this tome of 10 years of the production of crap, basically, that will all end up in a landfill. And the landfill to me is sort of like the store that I talked about to begin with, right? Like it is the final destination of all that stuff. And so, in a way, from an ecological point of view, we have to deal with this stuff, right? We can't just, the physicality of the screen and what you were talking about earlier. It's like you said when we take photographs, we're not really aware of the camera. Well, we actually were when we first started learning how to use a camera, right? And then it became like breathing. And when we breathe, we don't think about our breath. But we do have to start thinking about our breath, especially, I just had this cold, right? It's like when you have a cold, it's like when your screen breaks, you're all of a sudden aware of this thing that was completely completely invisible, right? So I don't there's something about the physicality of things that I think we really have to, of course, we all know this. We have to be aware of.
Oh, absolutely. And the I think the question of residue and landfills will become even more crucial, especially for artists in the next decade or so, because it is quite overwhelming. It's like the amount of images that we produce online becomes overwhelming. The physical objects in our lives.
They all represent some physical
Around,
object, right?
yeah, we're like we're surrounded. Like that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there is something about, like, like, every single image represents a physical object. Um, and then you had mentioned, or you had a question about selfies and, like, the presence of the subject in the photographs. What's fascinating to me is the more we photograph ourselves, it's just one physical object that gets re-photographed and shared, right? So in some ways, and this is what that project with the sunset portraits was mostly about, is the more you presence yourself online, the more you disappear, right? And so there's something about disappearance and physical presence and the materiality of things that, we only have one sun, right? But there's 49 million of them on on Flickr. Yeah.
Well, I think that's actually a great segue to Reservoir, to the project that we've been working on together, along with 40 other people. I have been so honored that we were able to join forces around this program, Reservoir, that's going to open as an exhibition for the first time on January 29th at LACP, is the product of 9 months of incubation on the path to delivery, where 37 artists from across the world joined 6 mentors to create new works around loneliness, photography, and well-being. And Penelope, you were one of the mentors of the program. Maybe we can start by you talking a little bit about the specific theme that you've crafted for your cohort. And maybe we can also talk about the role that you think technology plays in
Mm.
isolation and loneliness.
Yeah, I mean, when you invited me to think about this, it is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and partly there's an element of, I when I did my graduate degree, everybody was talking about postmodernism and how fragmented and schizophrenic culture was. And since then, that narrative has really changed. And sort of post-internet is kind of presenting itself as a kind of, like I don't say this lightly, but an autistic moment, right? Like that
Mm.
everybody is parallel to each other and not really we don't have well, yeah, the isolation that digital media presents is kind of more of an autistic mind frame rather than schizophrenic mind frame of postmodernism. And I'm I understand that it's problematic to use maybe the word autistic in this context, although my brother is severely autistic. So it is coming from a place of actually not knowing what that actually means. Um, and it is also something I think about a lot, like just how, and he probably would be equally influential in all of my work to the store that I spent so much time at when I was a kid. I mean, it's very clear, I think, and not really news to anybody that all the digital media um, that we are engaged in is at the same time as it somehow brings people together. Like you and I might not be having this conversation if we didn't have this kind of digital interface. Um, it really does isolate, and in the cohort that we created for my cohort, in the group that we created for my cohort, uh, some of the conversations around even just online transactional shopping, made us realize that, yeah, that is one of the major forces. Like, I now order takeout through this app. It comes to my door. I sometimes don't even see the person who's delivered it. I don't have to go to the restaurant and hang out with people. I, you know, um, I can watch all the movies I wanna watch on my TV at home or on my screen on my laptop. I don't have to go to a movie theater anymore, so those are just 2 physical. I don't go to the store to buy stuff. I do, but, um, I don't have to. I can order something and tomorrow it'll be on my doorstep,
I
so
absolutely do not go to the store. Nope.
yeah, so, there's it's so much easier in some ways, like, God, when my kids were young, it would've been great. It was, like, so great,
Kind of the same.
but, but yeah, I mean, it really does, like, when my kids were young, I knew all the people on the block that we lived on, and, or not all the people, but the stores around the corner, because I would be going there, like, we had these interactions, and they followed my kids. Um, I made some cookies for the laundromat on the corner that did all our kids' laundry for free, and they said, "Oh, these are so great, they're almost as good as store-bought." You know? Like, it was just these interactions, and that has stayed with me for so long. It was like, oh, yeah, it kind of is like the Craigslist images. It's like some kind of world, like, they're so like, these people who appreciate store-bought cookies better more than homemade cookies are in my life, and I'm having conversations with them. I wouldn't, like, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
to me, that was like a revelation. It's like, "What?" I thought it was an insult, but it was actually a compliment,
No,
you know? Like,
absolutely, it's a compliment. But let's bring that back then to Reservoir and your cohort. I'm kind of curious about how those conversations played out within the creative process,
mhm.
and if you guys learned anything new that you didn't expect to discover, maybe.
Well, I really loved the experience. Everybody in my cohort was really excited about, um, continuing the kinds of work that they have already done. Yeah, everybody in my cohort was really interested in, continuing the through line of work that they had been working on. Um, but I realized that there were certain kind of, holes in some of their knowledge of contemporary practice. So I kept throwing at them different, ways of working as kind of, just to open up a process for them.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of them took it on, right? Like, so that was really exciting for me. And also, I mean, I learned a lot. They were really great artists in this cohort, and I learned a lot from them, like, um, yeah, it was just really great to follow threads and see the work progress. One of the um, overlying frameworks that I used for the cohort was that we were going to really focus on hyperconsumerism,
Mhm.
which, is the description that people use about consumerism now because everything is available anytime, anywhere. Um, um, and So hyperconsumerism in relation to digital media, in relation to self-representation or representation in general. And, as a kind of thinking through why there is this crisis of loneliness. So not really privileging loneliness itself, but the process of getting to loneliness. Um, and it really did kind of make then the process and the results of the work be a little bit sort of tangential to the um the direct sort of uh, yeah, the results of the whole cohort, I think, are a little tangential to the sort of subjectivity of loneliness, right?
Mhm,
But really do push against issues that would create loneliness.
mhm.
I don't know if that answers your
No,
your question at all. Yeah.
absolutely. Because, we've been thinking a lot, and during the run of the program, I should know that during the run of the program, each cohort met by themselves, but once a month, we would come together, all the participants from across 6 or 7 different time zones. Um, and part of what I found really fascinating and gratifying is that for everybody participating, it was really important that the exhibition itself and whatever we create on the public level will
Mhm.
be a space that people can come into and see themselves reflected in it. Maybe find some solace by being in the space. And the way you talk about this now makes me also think about how hyper consumerism plays into that, like how we also need solace and maybe someone out there to recognize that we all have the same habits now, that we all
Yeah.
inhabit the world in this way in kind of
Mhm.
similar ways, almost no matter where we are. If
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
access to internet, then we probably shop. Um, so I love how your cohort brought in like this really interesting meeting point between the personal experience of consumers and how that plays into mental health as well.
Right,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that kind of brings me to the maybe one more question, something that I was hoping to hear you talk about is your own collaborative project.
Yeah, yeah. I
Work.
mean, that actually, I was thinking about that when you were talking about, like, how, how the cohort well, yeah, those build it so Annette, Burke, um, who was in my cohort, started making these photographs of the Amazon warehouse distribution centers. And, maybe they're not all Amazon, but they're basically e-commerce distribution centers, and they are just insane, like, they're just the most ugly prefab one of the things that we talked about was modular architecture and how, at this point, you don't even really need architects. There's another kind of,
Mhm.
push away of the individual, but it's not that AI is replacing them. Long ago, these applications like AutoCAD or SketchUp have catalogs of things that you can just plunk in, right? And these distribution centers are built that way. They're what I assume they're built that way because every element of them are these kind of nondescript, modular, gray,
Replicable.
beige,
Yeah.
replicable, repeatable, un undefined things, right? They're just these boxes, and then there's somewhat of an attempt to make them look corporate or a place that people might go, but they're just so ugly, and all the same, and, so she started photographing these. She started with, like, a before and after, going to, Google and finding, Google Maps and finding the landscape that these places are in now, but without the buildings and then the after with the buildings, and then she just started photographing the buildings, and they were so incredibly modular and the same. And, we've been working on Moreau, which is also another magic
Hmm.
magic application. Um, but so it's this canvas platform in which you can put all your work and scale it and crop it and do whatever. And I just couldn't, given my own work and how I am interested in the physical, um, collective sort of, the physical, m you know, repetitive collective thing.
Mhm.
Once you started posting more than, like, say, she had about 25, I'm like, "Oh my god, if you just crop in and get rid of the subjectivity of the space, like you don't have where you're standing and you just have the facade, these things are all so much the same, you could puzzle them all together. You could make a whole new building with them." And she was like kind of into that, but not quite, but got where I was coming from. And I was like, oh, this could be a collaboration then. And so, given the if she were to approve, like, she wanted to do the collaboration, it was kind of an interesting navigation because I kind of wanted to do it, but I didn't wanna do it unless she wanted to do it, but I wasn't sure that she would want me to do it and was just saying I could because I was, like, the leader to go for it,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it took us about a month for us to navigate this really sensitive kind of in my mind anyway. She's so much more direct, I'm sure she was being completely honest the entire
I
time,
mean,
but I
knowing
was
Annette, I'm sure
yeah.
she would just tell you.
Yeah, yeah. But, so anyway, um, yeah, as I had mentioned earlier, none of the images that I've ever used have been in my mind, authored by somebody, right? Like, either they're from a kind of collective, kind of scripted image where the individuality of the photographer is completely disappeared, or they're from, like, Craigslist or eBay where the individuality is so present, but the individual doesn't care about that presence, isn't authoring those images to be photographs, but just to sell an object, and they're garbage otherwise.
Yeah.
So with a network, because those images are completely authored, there's no way I would ever go in and use those images, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
not that's where I draw the line. Other people draw lines in other places, but my feeling is those images are completely authored and they're part of a project that is meaningful to a net. So I would not ever use them unless it was a collaboration between a net and me.
Mhm.
Even and so I started on Moreau sort of cropping and puzzling together because I couldn't help myself, right? And so she was like, "Oh, yeah, that looks really cool. Okay, let's do it." Um, and, so, yeah, so we made and, it didn't really make sense it didn't make sense to me to have them be prints. I mean, her work really functions beautifully as prints, but I thought they really should be like a puzzle game, so we made these little tiles, cards, um, and they can be puzzled together in whatever way so that you can actually create your own kind of puzzled together e e uh, e-commerce distribution center modules, yeah.
So we're kind of this is where we kind of go back to a similar place to where we started with playfulness and how
Mhm.
it connects to um the hyper consumerist environment in which we live today, and maybe providing some agency to the
Yeah,
people that will play with the game, right? To create
right.
their own distribution center.
Right. I mean, it's a really, it does kind of go back to all the things we touched on, right? Like, these are physical objects in the world. They're
Yeah.
so physical, and they're things are moving in and out of them that are physical constantly. But all of that is only driven by the digital presence of all that stuff, right? Like, all that stuff you see online, you order it and it shows up at your house. So there's this physicality, then digital ephemerality, and then the physical box, and then the trucks that go pick it up and then bring it to you. And then so with her, images, you get the sense of this physical block in this landscape. With my, conception with the game, you have a physical object that you are physically manipulating. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, what can I say? I can't wait to share this project with the world, opening January 29th at LACP in LA. And I'm so grateful to you, Penelope. What
Yeah.
amazing opportunity to kind of bring all of those threads together.
About Reservoir or this,
This
oh,
reservoir, all of
yeah,
it. That's
all of
it.
it's a pleasure, Rotem,
Yeah.
all of it's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Penelope.
Okay, thanks.